Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's with great pleasure that I'm here, and I want to make clear that I'm representing a quite extensive team of people from Emory University, and also our partner, Mr. Nanda, is here representing from Rural Welfare Institute, and they delivered the intervention. So this research took place in rural Odisha, India. At the time of, just when we were doing our formative research, the National Family Health Survey had come out and indicated that in Odisha, there was about 35% coverage in rural parts of Odisha. So thus 65% of those in the area didn't have any kind of facility, and only 13% were practicing the safe disposal of child feces. Just after we carried out our baseline, we looked at the Swachh Bharat Mission dashboard and found that coverage had been reported to be around 56% in rural Odisha. And then just recently, in April, after we did our end line, that number jumped to 84%. And very currently, that number is around 87% in the state of Odisha and 85% in Puri. It's important to note that Odisha has the second lowest coverage as a state in all of India. And so this is the context within which this study was being carried out. A lot of increase in coverage, but still a long way to go. So the intervention that we designed is called Sundaragrama, which means beautiful village. It was a multi-level intervention, which means that there were various activities at the community level, also a subgroup level with mothers across the villages, and also directly at the household level. It was informed by various theories, including behavior-centered design, Ranas, Combi, and the trans-theoretical model. So what did we do? Our intervention at the community level included a pala, or performance, that included music and skits that delivered messages and demonstrations around latrine use, a transect walk, and there's an image of that transect walk there on the right, where we went around in the villages early in the morning and had people come with us and mark feces out in the villages to demonstrate where feces were all over the villages, not only in the defecation fields, but also in the roads. And what was useful about this is that even people who didn't participate in the activity could very clearly see these colors all over the village and understand the extent to which feces was in their environment. We then held community meetings so that people could create action plans and a mission around thinking about how to keep their village clean, had a wall painting to record these villages and also indicate which households were positive deviants or households where all people were using latrines, and hung banners in those identified households. At a group level, we had meetings with mothers where we distributed hardware, including potties and scoops, but more importantly, information about why safe disposal of child feces is really important, what health risks exist, and also on top of that, how do you actually safely dispose of child feces? A lot of moms were not aware of this information. And finally, at the household level, we did do targeted latrine repairs. We found that 31% of all of the latrines in all of the villages that we went to had some sort of repair that was needed, whether a connection of a pit to the pan or even a door. Various factors in the environment and the brain and body in order to elicit those changes of behavior and hope that they would be changes that would sustain those changed behavior. So these interventions specifically targeted social norms, self-regulation, physical opportunity, various types of motivation, ability, and risk perceptions. This slide simply shows that we carried out our intervention in 66 villages. In the blue, you'll see there are 33 that got the intervention and 33 that did not. But we also had qualitative villages where we simply asked people what they perceived of the intervention after it was delivered. And we also conducted a rigorous process evaluation along the way to see if the intervention was delivered as we intended it to be. Overall, we went to over 5,000, nearly 6,000 households, every single household across these 66 villages, and we found that actually coverage in the target sample was 68% of people had a latrine, so much lower than the numbers that I was reporting to you. And so what did we find? So this bar chart shows in the gray boxes, you'll see that there are the baseline numbers where you have in the control arm where there was no intervention at baseline, 62% of people using latrines and 60% in the intervention. What the blue boxes represent is what we found at endline. So in control villages that did not receive the intervention, 75% were using the latrines, and then in intervention, 80%. And so the numbers on the top, though, represent the difference. And what we found essentially is that, yes, in both the intervention and non-intervention arms, we did see an increase in use. But through our analysis, we identified that there was a greater use of 6.4% among those that received the intervention. These additional bar charts show simply that the change was similar among both men and women. So a 6.6 percentage point increase for women and a 6.1% increase among men. So most notably about our work, I think, is the fact that we also evaluated the safe disposal of child feces. So specifically, we were looking at mother's behavior or caregiver behavior of reported disposal of feces into the latrine at baseline and endline. And I point this out because what this doesn't capture is a child who may have not used a latrine at endline, but at baseline, but used it at endline. So specifically the caregiver disposal behaviors. And what we found is that there was very low overall at baseline, only 3%. In control villages reported safely disposing of feces, and intervention 6%. But at endline, we see those numbers vastly different among the intervention communities. A 20.4 percentage point increase, controlling for the changes that we saw among the control as well, which is pretty substantial. But it also means that there's still a lot of room for improvement. So we also did a process evaluation, and I just want to go over this briefly because I think it's important to note that process evaluations are really critically important in order to determine if the intervention was actually delivered as it was intended to be delivered. And what this information can tell us is how the intervention delivery could be improved if this was to go to scale or be modified or adapted in future iterations. So in terms of the PALA, overall people really liked it. It was well attended, enjoyable. People even mentioned afterwards wanting repeat performances. But what we also found was that women reported not being able to go. A lot of women said that they could not go to spaces where other men were convening, and this was not consistent in all villages, but in some villages we actually witnessed that no women were present. So this is something that we would have to consider moving forward. In the transect walk, we did not actually have high number of people participating, but a lot of people did witness the effects of it afterwards and said that it was relatively important in helping the community members realize the state of their villages. Women, though, also importantly expressed that this was concerning to them because it happened really early in the morning when they were most likely to go out, even women who did not have a latrine, so had no option. So if this was happening, this transect walk, a whole group of people, while they were openly defecating, it was a cause of concern for shame, and that was certainly not an intention of ours. We had the community meetings. These were initially intended to be sex segregated, but due to time and our want to have our costs remain low, we ended up needing to combine these and not having separate meetings for women and men. So what we don't know, because these were mixed groups, the extent to which women were able to participate or even attend. So in the future, if we were able to, we would aim to make sure that these were sex segregated so that women's voices were heard and integrated into the plans. And then finally, with the mothers group meeting, this was highly attended. 96% of households with children, so those eligible to attend, did report someone in their household did attend. Some of the messages that we wanted to get by were missed, but our biggest concern overall was that those in attendance at each household were not necessarily the moms. They weren't the people that we were trying to get to. They were the mother-in-laws or an auntie or someone. So a lot of the younger moms were not able to go. They were not able to leave the house. So we also realized that the potties themselves were not as useful as we thought they were going to be. So the impact that we're seeing, we think, is relative to the fact that a lot of the people reported in the qualitative that they simply did not know the risks of disposing child feces in the environment. Many of them had simply put it in a garbage pile or behind the toilet, and they actually didn't know how to properly or safely dispose of the feces. So that information and practical guidance alone to increase their ability and risk perception was incredibly important. So moving forward, we would encourage this intervention, but we would make modifications to make sure that we were actually reaching the moms that we intended to reach. So in concluding, we found that this deliberate theory-informed intervention was effective at accelerating change in the intervention communities. It wasn't a huge number in terms of latrine use, but we did see a change above and beyond the change that was happening in the background in the control communities. We would want to investigate this further to understand who may have specifically changed their behaviors and why. The intervention as deployed is particularly useful for this change in safe disposal of child feces, but also modifications there are needed, and I think impact could be greater if we made some changes based on what we found in our process evaluation. So if we were to make recommendations moving forward for government, but also for stakeholders, there is a need to maintain the momentum of behavior change in these communities, to think about how we can get to those who are not yet using, and also to think really about the opportunities that exist for safe child feces disposal. This has not been a primary target of the Swachh Bharat mission to date, but clearly there are low-cost interventions that are impactful and that could be quite effective in reaching rural households. And with that, I just want to say thanks to the extensive team, but not only that, the time and care with all the participants across all of the communities that we worked with to give us their time and effort in participating in the interventions and in the research. And also a special thank you to Mr. Nanda for leading the research delivery, the intervention delivery from Rural Welfare Institute in Odisha. Thank you.